Good morning, Lucy. Good. I can't hear you. Oh, you're muted. Here, I'll ask you to unmute.
Okay.
Here you go. Now.
All right. Yeah, I will leave here at 10 and can get to church on time.
And so we're going to do Sunday school 9:15 to 10 for that reason.
Okay, rather, because I used to come in and sit in the parish hall, so, but I'm happy to stay here, and I'm just totally ready for just get in the car and come.
You're devoted. Well, you did that, and a couple other people, Brad Trammell, like they would have to leave and drive to church. So we were finding that we needed a little more time than just 10:15 to 10:30. So we thought,
right,
just be done at 10 so we can get all of our ducks in a row. And
did you see, the Martins, Jeanette, and I can't think of her husband's name. They live out at Kirby Pines. Yeah, they were on the news last night. They apparently were trying to get a shot. I don't think it was yesterday. I think it was earlier in the week, and we're in line for like 5 hours.
Oh my!
At the Pitkin building. But they said yesterday was better, but we get our second shot Tuesday at the Pitkin building. So I'm praying that it won't be forever.
Me too. You and Ceylon, we're going to go?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And he's scheduled to have his other ankle fused February 16th. So it's a good thing for him to have both the shots before he goes in the hospital and before he spends 10 weeks in the Jewish home.
Yes,
so
definitely.
And he's hoping that this surgery will take him off the walker, that he'll be able to use a cane and to get around a little bit better.
Good.
So anyway, he's the bionic man. 2 knees, 2 hips, a spinal fusion, and now 2 ankles.
He should be good for another 100,000 miles.
Right, yeah, right. And he's a type 2 diabetic, but he does very well with all that too. So anyway, we'll see.
Well, good. Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9:15 or 9:14, and everyone is beginning to gather and find their way online. So I suggest that we go ahead and jump in and see how much ground we can cover this morning as we talk again about Eucharistory and its where does it come from? What informs what we do? Look, the St. John's, as beautiful as our building is, didn't drop out of the sky in 1952 in this beautiful shape. It is based on thousands of years of tradition, and look forward to sharing more with you about that this morning. So good morning, St. John's, and if you would pray with me, we will commence. Let us pray. New every morning is your love for us, O God, and as we gather, we are grateful for your presence in our midst. And though we are a community that is dispersed across the city right now, and we are gathered in this digital way, we acknowledge your presence, and we are grateful this day. As we rest and as we are strengthened for what lies ahead in the coming week, we ask that you would give us a sense of your presence and that you would allow us to serve you in your church. These things we ask in the name of your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
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 Okay, so it's good to see each of you here today, and I want to say a couple things on the front end, just so you know, just we're on the same page, what you can expect today. By the end of our time this morning, we're going to end at 10 o'clock. By the end of our time today, you're going to know more about Alexander the Great than you ever cared to know about Alexander the Great, and you're going to understand how his empire created a set of customs that unified a group of people of different ethnicities and faiths into one common set of customs or culture. I'm gonna close this. There are people coming on, and I was trying to do both, but that's what Miranda is here to do. So so by the end of this time, you're gonna know about Alexander the Great and about what he does in his empire that creates something new, really. And you're gonna understand how pervasive his influence was, and how the Eucharist fits into the larger meal customs that are established by his kingdom. So that's where we are aiming today. So no matter what you have done this morning before this time, you've probably been in a unique place. I didn't wake up this morning and see any of you in my house. If you were, you got past the alarm, and that's creepy. So you've come from wherever you might be. Your unique setting this morning. It's been different. But when we come to church, and really, this is Christian formation or Sunday school is a part of it, and there's some variance. But when we get to 10:30 worship, we all know what to do because we do the same thing. One of my favorite stories that I've heard in my time at St. John's, a parishioner was in India for business, and she got up in the morning. You're however many hours ahead. And she went to church where she was in India. There was an Anglican church. I don't know how much you guys are aware of it, but the Anglican church in India is quite large. And so she went, didn't know a single word of the language. There was not a single word in English, but she told me she knew exactly where she was because the liturgy was the same, right? And there's some power in that, and thinking about our ritual, our tradition. No matter where we come from, I got up this morning at 5 o'clock and put the heating pad on my back and started to work on 3 or 4 different things. Well, your morning might or might not have looked like that, but when we get together, we know what we can expect. And that's one of the great things about the church and in general. Also, you're going to know a little bit more about what meals actually looked like in the world that Alexander the Great, he built, essentially. So Alexander the Great, his empire marks a new historical era. In fact, it is his life that marks the beginning of the Hellenistic period. So he was born in the city-state of Macedonia. His father, when he was born, Alexander the Great was born, he was the king of the Macedonian city-state in Greece. And I want to show you this image so you can get a sense of what this looked like. Is everybody able to see this image? So up here in the top left corner of this image, there is Macedonia, right? And for context sake, I don't know how much you really know about this part of the world. I can tell you, I'm a little more comfortable looking down here. Do you see the Red Sea and Egypt? I'm going, okay, so that sounds like the Old Testament, and then of course Israel and Jerusalem, right? So I recognize those things, and you see Damascus and Tyre, and in the Gospels Jesus teaches there some, but there is this whole other part of the globe that's really not as well known to me. That area above the Mediterranean Sea on this image. You see Greece and Macedonia and Thrace. For context's sake, when you were a kid, I don't know if you learn this way, but you learn where Italy is on the map because it looks like a boot kicking a football. Do you remember that? If you've ever seen a map, it's Italy looks like this boot, and then Sicily looks like a football below the mainland. All this Greek peninsula up here, that is just east of maybe what is a more familiar part of the map. But you see, this is where in Macedonia on the Greek Isle, that is where Alexander was born and raised. Why does this matter? Well, if you look closely at the Greek island or peninsula, it's a kind of a strange way to think about it, but Greece, Macedonia, Thrace, also Thebes, Athens. Each of these different areas on this map are, though they are very geographically close, I mean, closer than we think about distances in our giant country. They are very, very different. They each have a different set of customs. They each have different sets of gods. They have a different set of laws and what is socially acceptable. So you can imagine right there in the region that Alexander comes from, just right there, before you even consider other parts of the world, there is variance everywhere you go, right? Beyond Macedonia and the other Greek states, can you imagine the difference between being in this map in Greece, all the way over to say modern day India, over on the far right, the western edge of this map, or on down to Egypt? These are vastly different peoples and places. There is no commonality between them. Different ethnicities, different religions, much more difference than there is points of similarities. But that will change. So the first story told about young Alexander was at age 12. He successfully tamed this wild, enormous stallion named Bucephalus, a stallion that no one else could tame. This animal became his battle mount for most of the rest of Alexander's life. And I was thinking about, if you think about this stallion that this young boy is able to tame that no one else can tame, that's a massive part of his story. And I couldn't help but thinking about and comparing that in my own mind to Jesus's quote unquote triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem in the week of his death. What happens then, if you remember? He enters on the back of a borrowed donkey, not a noble war stallion, but a pack animal that doesn't even belong to him. So you can start to see how Jesus's life and the events that unfold in his ministry are very, very different than what people expected about rulers and kings, right? So at 12 he tames this wild stallion nobody can tame. His adolescents are a lot different than adolescents for you and me. At 13, he's tutored by Aristotle, right? Yeah, that Aristotle, as in the one that we all read in college. So he learned a width and breadth of topics that a classical philosophical education would entail. When he was 16, his father, Philip II, who was king of Macedonia, that city-state on the Greek peninsula that we were looking at, he goes into battle against the Byzantine Empire, leaving his son, who was a teenager at 16, in charge of the entire Macedonian Empire. Alexander uses this opportunity to defeat the sacred band of Thebes, who were a formidable and yet undefeated military guard from the city-state of Thebes. Think about how close that is, but how very different it would have been. So in 336, his father is assassinated by his own bodyguards, and Alexander's tutor, Aristotle, once famously said that nature abhors a vacuum. So there were multiple suitors. There was a power grab, and there was an attempt to seize the empty throne. And Alexander is just 20 years old at this point in his life, but he is able to defeat all of those challengers, all the challenges to the throne, and he seizes power for himself. You think, man, that's 20 years old. That's an awful lot for a person to have accomplished at age 20. Maybe you and I would have been content to simply say, you know what, I think I'm going to sit and rest now. But you don't, I'm not Jay the Great, and nor are you. You don't get to be known as the great with a limited appetite for power. So he decides that he is going to take his army, the Macedonian army, in 333. He takes what is a smaller force against Darius and the Persian army. And if you remember again in your Bible history, it is the Babylonians who send Israel into exile. It is the Babylonians who defeat the temple, who began the diaspora and spread out Jewish people all across the known region. And it is Darius, the Persian king, who allows them to come back. If you remember, if you've read much of your Old Testament. So in 333, Alexander takes the small force into battle. It happens near Issus in modern day Turkey, and he's outnumbered, but he actually wins the day. And Darius, the king, he fled. Alexander pursued the Persian king east and south and encountered him again in 332 in the region of Tyre and Sidon on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. He laid siege to that walled city, breached the wall, and killed thousands of people there. But Darius fled again. Hang in, I'm going to show you a map of this if you're more of a visual person. So he pursues Darius down and further south into Egypt. And after a siege on Gaza, he entered Egypt and built the city of Alexandria. And in October of 331, and again, so think about, we're talking about 300 years before the birth of Christ. Darius tried to flee again, but his own troops assassinated him. And it is in that year that Alexander was named king of Persia. Now, again, if you're like me, you're thinking, wow, that's a pretty ambitious guy, and maybe he can rest. Well, guess what? He's not finished yet. Perhaps we would have been content with something as outstanding as this military conquest. But again, you and I are not known as the great. So in 327, he pushes even further. This is amazing, into modern day India. And he took control over a territory from King Poros of Porava. And he wanted to go further, but his troops are exhausted, so they rebelled against him. He agrees to stay, and he returns to Persia. So now he is king of Macedonia, Persia, and he is still hungry for more. He wants to have more power and more control. So in 323, Alexander pushes into modern day into Arabia, modern day Iran, but he died in June of 323. He was only 32 years of age, and he died before this military campaign was complete. But I wanted to show you just to kind of get a sense of how impressive and how absolute his power was. I want to show you it's a short video. It's a minute and a half that will lay out for you what I have just shared with you. So this is an overview of Alexander's conquest laid out month by month. This is a fascinating look at it. You see it creeping down from Macedonia? So now that's Israel, that's Jerusalem. This red part at the bottom is Egypt. See him making his way down the Mediterranean Sea. So I forget on Zoom if the cursor shows up, but you can see here on the map on the far left. That's and maybe now that I think about it, maybe my teachers never said that Italy and Sicily were like a boot kicking a football. Maybe that's just how I remembered it. I don't know. Drop that in the chat if that sounds familiar to you. But you can see we're talking about an area just east of what might be more familiar territory. And so by the time Alexander is dead in 323 at 32 years of age, he has built the largest kingdom that the world has ever known. So I'm not really sure that we can fully appreciate how unique and formative his life was, but stop and consider it for a moment. What he's able to do. He's able to make an empire out of a variety of people and religions over 3,000 miles of real estate. Okay, so stop and consider how large that is for a moment. Alexander the Great was able to bring a people as far dispersed as Vancouver, Canada, to Miami, Florida, into one set of common customs around so many things, but for our conversation, meals. It is almost unfathomable that one person could have such an impact. And look, if you think about, again, for sort of comparison's sake, I lived for a couple of years. I was over in Greenville, South Carolina, right? That's 500 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. It's the Southeast, but it's not the same as here. The first time I told a group of people who were thinking about having a parish fellowship event, I said, the church that I came from used to have crawfish boils. And people said, excuse me? And I said, crawfish boils. They don't do that there. They do oyster roast, which we'll do at St. John's because they're equally wonderful opportunities. But if you can think about how those variants, even in the same region, let alone a distance of 3,000 miles, you can begin to maybe grasp how incredible this man's life and his legacy really was. So I want to move into a bit more about what those actual meal customs were. Now that we have walked with Alexander from his teenage years to his death, and what is a very very high level overview. And before we begin to look specifically at what those meal customs were, I wanted to pause and either allow you to correct me if you're a classicist and I've gotten these dates wrong, or if there's something that sort of pops up for you, or give me a second to swig my Topo Chico as well. Okay. As always, if something comes up, drop that in the comment. Miranda's watching the chat box there. Yeah. So one of the byproducts of this man's amazing success, Alexander the Great, is that culture and customs are normalized. And so a swath of the planet that runs from modern day Greece over into the Near East and Egypt was influenced by the culture that Alexander the Great introduced. And while this is impressive, his military conquests are not his most important legacy. The 300 years of history in this era is known as the Hellenistic Period because of the cultural changes that are introduced on a multitude of ethnic and religious groups. In fact, the word Hellenism, which this entire era of history is referred to, just to give you a sense of how total and comprehensive this influence was. Hellenism comes from the word Heliazon, which means to speak Greek or identify with the Greeks. So he changes everything. He makes a unified culture and set of customs where there were dozens or hundreds of thousands. And so we know what our meal customs look like, right? If we get together for a meal, and I'm not even talking about a church meal, but there's sort of a script of how dinners go, right? I don't think I'm the only one who, for about an hour before guests arrive in my home, I'm thinking the meal's not going to ever come together. The house is a wreck. I should have gotten all those sorts of things that we do. But what did their meal customs look like? We can't directly impose what you and I do in our homes in having dinner guests in a formal meal into something that happened 2,000 years ago. So let's turn our attention there and see actually what those meal customs look like. So in the same way that we have our own scripts and our customs, our codes of conduct that determine how we behave leading up to a dinner, a banquet, and I would also say the same is true of preparing to gather around the meal, the table at church. They had, in the Hellenistic world, they had their own set of customs that dictated their dinner banquets. And maybe that's not as surprising as it is at first, until you start to actually examine what it looked like, and it looked very different. It started like this: when a person planned a dinner banquet, they would extend an invitation to their desired guests, either by a household servant, if they were a person of some means who had a household staff, or by a courier. And you think, well, that's nice. Here's the trick. An invitation was formal, and it would have been received or rejected prior to the banquet itself. And it was very, very selective, because to share table fellowship with another person was to acknowledge them as your equal. Right? So pause for a moment and think about that. You would have only dined with someone that you would want to receive an invitation to dine with as well. You would to break bread with someone would be to acknowledge them as your equal. So, in other words, this formal invitation that would follow, the formal invitation that would precede a meal set a hard line between who were your desired peers and those that you considered of an inferior sort. Again, pause and think about what Jesus does. Jesus eats with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. By acknowledging them and dining in their home, Jesus is acknowledging that they are his equal. That's taking the script and ripping it up and throwing it out the window, right? As Mary Douglas has written this wonderful book called Ritual and Purity, and she talks about how Jewish people carved out their identity in this broader Hellenistic world by having a specific set of customs that made their meals look different from the Gentiles of the larger culture. And she says, food, the way it's prepared, shared, and withheld set social boundaries. And she writes, quote, "If food is treated as code, the message it encodes will be found in the pattern of social relations being expressed. The message is about different degrees of hierarchy, inclusion and exclusion, boundaries and transactions across the boundaries. Like sex, the taking of food has a social component as well as a biological one." Right? So to dine with someone is not simply to satiate your hunger, right? It's not about putting bread and wine into your stomach. There is a component of that, absolutely, but it is, but the meals are inherently social, right? I mean, we don't go and stand in a straight line facing a wall in our kitchen and eat out of feed sacks like cattle, because when we break bread together, we are doing something that is more than simply breaking bread together. Does that make sense? Once the set of invitations have been accepted and the number of diners had been determined, the next crucial step would be to determine the social ranking of those guests so that they could be seated in their correct social ranking. The only modern day equivalent that I can think of that is anything remotely like this is the pain and great anxiety that people go through when imagining where to sit people at wedding receptions and wedding rehearsal dinners. I can't tell you, as a parish priest, how many meals I've had with the deaf aunt or the distant out of state cousin who has come because they have to be there because they're family, but they're not going to be sitting at the head table with the bride and groom, right? And look, I did that at my own wedding too. I'm not impugning anybody's character. It's just those things matter, right? So if you invite someone to your table and they acknowledge you as their equal and they are above your status, you better sit them right beside you in order to let everyone else know at this dinner who's the most important guest. So the host would select the guest of honor, the dinner guest, the highest social ranking. The person would be the guest of honor, and they would be seated at the right hand of the host. Now, where does that take our minds, right? Oh yeah, Jesus, right, says something about this, right? Sitting at the right hand of the Father. I'm going to show you this wonderful graphic in a minute that really captures what that is about in a powerful way. So the guest of honor seated at the right hand, the guest with lower honor would be seated in descending rank towards the foot of the table and the door. This is perilous because a miscalculation of guest's honor could produce shame and anger for them, and more importantly, fewer or no dinner invitations back as the host of the meal if you've dishonored your guests. So when the evening of the everybody good so far? Okay. So when the evening of a banquet came, the guests would come. They would stand at the banquet host's home. They would be greeted at the door by a household servant if the host had enough means. And do you know what the word for the servant is? Diaconos. Do you know where the word deacon comes from? Diaconos, right? So when we talk about Jesus assuming the posture at his, again, we talked last week about how much of what Jesus says and does is around a meal. What happens at the Last Supper? Do you remember? Jesus takes a towel, wraps it around his waist, and goes and washes his guests' feet. So the Son of God assumes the posture of a servant, right? Deacons, look, when I was made a priest, I was made a deacon first. When Bishop Phoebe Rofe was made a bishop, she was made a deacon first because that servant leadership, which we see in Christ, is what we are called to do. So the servant, the diaconos, would stand there and wash people's feet. If you maybe didn't have as much money, as many means, maybe you would just have a minor member of your household receive the guests, and prior to them being admitted, they would stoop and untie the sandals of their guests and wash their feet. Does that sound like John the Baptist, right? There's one coming after me who is more powerful. I am not worthy to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandal. Well, John didn't just make that up. He's saying, I am lower than the lowliest servant who's not even fit to do this very basic work. Once your feet are washed, you would come into the dining room. The banquet would be held in the dining room. Now, there is a temptation, and I showed you the famous image of the Last Supper last week. It looks like they're sitting kind of like at a picnic table, maybe, with the wooden bench. If you've ever been to a meal at St. John's, there are tables and chairs with tablecloths, and we do our best to serve 80 or 100 people in a way that's nice. If you've been to someone's home, you put out the nicer the meal, the nicer the food, the nicer the silverware and the stoneware, right? Maybe you bring out your china. In my home, I have this wooden table and chairs, and I have this antique buffet that sits in front of this large exterior window. So if you can imagine what your dining room looks like, or maybe a room where you have had a wonderful meal, maybe one of your favorite meals from your life, take that image out of your mind and throw it away, because it cannot be any further away from what meals look like in the Hellenistic world. The guests would be escorted to a dining room, which was most oftentimes located near the front entrance of a home, so that private chambers could remain private. You could have someone in the front of your home, but not fully into the depths of the bedrooms and bathrooms and those sorts of things. And you would come in. There would be servants there waiting, and as Plato wrote, quote, so the attendant washed and made him ready for reclining. Yes, you heard that right, reclining. Okay, so the dining room where a dinner banquet would be held, it was centered around food and wine. And for us at St. John's, the liturgy of the word and liturgy of the table. The dinner table in a banquet in the Hellenistic world would have been much more like maybe a coffee table in your home that's surrounded with these benches with pillows that are on them. They called them couches. The best image maybe to have in your mind would be to imagine a coffee table with poolside recliners all around. If you can imagine that, you might be beginning to approximate what a dinner banquet in the Hellenistic world looked like. And one of the Hellenistic practices that became ubiquitous in these dining parties was to eat while reclining. To assume this posture implied leisure. They would recline on their left elbow and eat with their right. Okay. So I want to show you a couple of images here, and I see the chat popped up. Hey, yeah, that's right. Margaret reminds us that we both just had an anniversary. Thank you for reminding me. 2014 and 2019. So happy anniversary, Miranda. Yours was the 26th. That just happened. Very good. And then also another point John Ryder makes: since Alexander couldn't be in several places in his kingdom at one time, did you find anything about how new practices were enforced? That's a fascinating question. How would you go about making sure this massive change, which sort of unifies all people? And John, I did not come across in my preparation anything around that. Now, I could sort of take a shot at it. I mean, there were certainly different legal codes and whatnot, but I don't, and also, I'm thinking out loud, which can be dangerous potentially, but I feel like if you were going to participate in the broader culture where there's power, money, and influence, if you're going to be transactional in that world, you got to play ball with the way they do things, right? So I would imagine there would have been some pressure to comply, just so that you could use quote, that's a just so you could be fluent in the language of the empire. That would be my guess, but it's a fine question. So I'm going to show you a couple of these images. This is if you are at all curious, I found some really fascinating. Excuse me, let me pull that down real quick. There was a really interesting article that had some just amazing pictures in the National Geographic in 2017. So I've actually pulled these to share with you on the screen so that you can have a sense of what some of this looked like in real time, right? So if you look at this, this is a 5th century piece of art from the Berlin State Museum showing people at a dinner banquet drinking wine. And look, as you can see, they are reclining on their left while dining. Is this something to eat in the man's hand? You see a bowl of wine. So that kind of puts some of these ideas into real time. This is an image of Dionysius, who was the god of wine. So this would have been an important part if you are a Greek person. If you are not Jewish or Christian, you get together and have wine to celebrate the god of wine, Dionysius. This is, we were talking about how that invitation process might have worked, and the National Geographic article that I found says that a host might invite guests to a feast after bumping into them at a public meeting place of classical Athens known as the Agora. So perhaps you are out dining, you see someone, and then you make a note to yourself to send a household servant later to invite that person to dinner. By the way, just I'm kind of nerdy, and I like words, and I really like learning more about where words come from and whatnot. Do you see? Notice what this market is called. It's an agora. So agoraphobia, right, which is something that you're in the world of a pandemic, when everybody's at home, maybe your agoraphobia has gone down. It's fear of public places. It's fear of being with people in a public place, based on the agora, that Greek marketplace. And the other image that I wanted to show, you see, there are people dining here on these benches like we're talking about. There is in this meal, there is a person playing a lyre, the musical instrument. That's gives you a sense of what the entertainment might have looked like in a dinner. And then this is the image that I'm really so taken with. You see, this depicts a dining room in the average person's home. You see servants in the kitchen here on the far right side preparing meals. You see someone who is there is a servant, it looks like, in the I can't tell if that's a servant or someone playing an instrument, but you can see that these people are reclining on their left arm and eating with their right. So to sit at the right hand of the Father, right? This is the image that Jesus uses. To sit at the right hand of the Father means that you are the guest of honor, because if someone is laying on their left elbow and eating with their right, to sit at the right hand is to face the host. If you were at his left, you would actually be at his back. So you can imagine that the guest of honor would have been the one that the host was most interested in sharing that meal with. It's a beautiful depiction of the and then more pieces of pottery. This is actually a foundation of a Greek home that shows the foundation, that beautiful inlay. What do you call that? That's a what do you call that decorative tile like that? I don't know. One of y'all knows that stuff.
Mosaic.
Yeah, mosaic. Thank you. I went to seminary, I promise. Debbie Freeberg asks a great question. Are there women? Are the women in another room? At first, these would have been male-only affairs, right? I mean, think about it. The pater familias is the head of the household. His rule is rock solid, and he gets to do whatever he wants. The women are just a part of the household. So this would have been a male-only affair at first. Those servant girls who were walking around playing musical instruments, you better believe they're there to do more than just that if these wealthy, powerful men decide that's what they want to do. Thankfully, we live in a different world than that. Particularly in terms of a philosophic meal, where rather than music, people would sit and would talk about big picture ideas. If you're a Jewish person, you might debate what it means to keep the Sabbath and to keep the law. When people begin to talk about heavy matters, within about 100 years, actually, women would have been admitted to these banquets. It became and that starts to change some, of course, with Christians, because so much of what they do is very, very different. But a person who proved that they could hold their own and had the sort of mental capacity to talk about big, heavy things, they would eventually, within 100 years, had been welcomed into those dining events. That's a good question. So let's see here. All right. So I want to be mindful of our time here. So you would sit together around tables that are short, like a coffee table. You are reclining. What did people eat? Well, unfortunately, food has a shelf life, and no meal has come down intact from antiquity. But we know that meals would have been served in courses. The more wealthy, the more courses. The more prosperous a host, the more lavish a dinner party. Meat was exceedingly rare, so we can imagine courses of grains and vegetables and fish. Something else that's really kind of wild, that is just a detail that I love, is it was believed that bread would have been used as a napkin. So someone would take a piece of bread, wipe their mouth, clean their hands, and throw it on the ground. And there are dogs in the dining room who are there to pick up those scraps of bread. And do you remember the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman? Right? Do you remember Jesus? Jesus says, "I've come to serve the house of Israel." And this woman says, "Lord, even the dog gets the scraps from beneath the table." And she completely flips Jesus's argument on its head. She didn't just make this stuff up. It's because this is actually an image that I wanted to share with you briefly, just because it captures what we're talking about. This is actually an image of an illustration from this book that I've been using to prepare for this class. And if you look here, you see there's presumably a musician and someone with a pitcher of wine. Do you see there from that central font? And then if you look over here on the left side, underneath the bench of the guy sitting under number 10, well, lo and behold, it's a little puppy dog, right? Why is that dog there? That dog is there to get those scraps of bread from beneath the master's table. And like that, we have more of an understanding of what Jesus teaches, and how that woman's retort corrects and really teaches him more fully what he's to do with these people. So you would have dessert, right? Some kind of dessert. It's probably dates. It's probably something, it's not as sweet maybe as what we would anticipate, but some kind of sweet course. And then you would move into the second part of the meal. So there would be food, wine across the evening. And then in the second part, you would have the symposium, where you would begin to either have, if you are gathered for a concert, you would hear music. If you're gathered around some sort of fraternal or civil organization, you would have a different set of entertainment. But it is in the second course that part of the meal that is more than just about filling our stomachs becomes most clear, right? It's about eating, but it's also about sharing life and developing an interior life and talking about things that matter. One image that might help you kind of get a sense of what I am trying to say. If you look at what Alexander the Great is able to do, there is a new model. There is a common banquet tradition across all people, and in terms of ethnicity, religion, et cetera. And the Christian Eucharist, which is where we're going to wind up next week, talking about, first it comes from the Jewish practice, and then becomes its own separate Christian identity. That's all part of this larger banquet fellowship that Alexander the Great started in the 4th century BCE. So people would get together, and they would after the banquet part of the meal, the diners would discuss questions that would be maybe entertaining or stimulating. There was a contemporary person who actually recorded several questions from a symposium at a dinner table from the philosopher Taurus. The guests discussed questions, quote, such as, quote, when did a dying man die? Was he already in the grasp of death as he was dying, or while he, does death start at the moment of death, or was he already under the influence of death before, while he was still living, right? That, when we celebrate the Eucharist, this stuff becomes more clear, because first we do what? We talk about the bread, right? And then what do we say? You'll hear Miranda say it at 10:30. After supper, he took the cup, right? And then we talk about the chalice of wine, and we have a sense of how the Christian Eucharist started in a Hellenistic banquet in 400 years before the birth of Christ. So that is a ton of information, and I do want to honor our time and make sure that we're able to get 10:30 lined up. So before I hop off, any questions or anything that sort of stands out to you? You know, my sense is when we start talking about this stuff, you're going to hear it. You know, when we go to church, if you're watching from home or if you're here in Scripture, in each of the different Eucharistic prayers, this stuff is just right below the surface. And I think in looking at this material, we'll have a more hopefully a stronger foundation and be able to make even all the more sense about it. Yeah, right. I love this. John Ryder said maybe we should have one of these banquets when we get back together, food, wine, and discussion of life's big questions. Man, I am for that. And look, and so I could get cranked up all over again. I completely affirm John's point. And look, if we can't be people of faith who talk about things that matter and maybe disagree with each other, if we can't do that civilly, gosh, who can? Right. So, I mean, I think one of the things that's going to be important for the church and probably for St. John's going forward is to be in relationship with each other and talk about tough stuff, because we can't ignore it, because Monday through Saturday, we're all seeing it. Right. Look, I'm living in the same world y'all are living in, and there's not much civility. But maybe that's easier with a meal and a glass of wine. Okay, so and then Susan People said we remember wonderful agape feasts at St. John. So that would have been before my time. Excuse me, Margaret and Grayson made that point. So we have done something like that before, and maybe it's something we should do again. I mean, look, if this is something that I mean, I guess we wouldn't call it a toga party per se, but if y'all want to have some kind of a gathering when we can get back together, hey, I'm for it. So I appreciate your time this morning, and I hope you have a good Sunday, a good Sabbath day of rest. Next week we're going to talk about the Jewish meal custom and how the Christian meal custom comes from that, and then in 2 weeks, Peter, we're going to talk about how do we make sense of this Eucharistic meal today, right? And there are different theologies that the prayer book really kind of lays out for us. So that's where we are today. It's where we're going. I appreciate your time, and I will see you again soon. Peace.